Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Relationship Matters live cast. You can see I have guests here, Brian and Jen, and we're going to introduce them just in a minute here. Hey, I just wanted to let you know we do this live cast and then turn it into a podcast just to talk about relationships. I believe everything flows out of relationship. And so I found it really important that we start having conversations about it, especially through COVID. We've seen such a massive impact, negative impact on relationships. And so I started this podcast and a live cast so that we could have these conversations with regular people, also experts who are also regular people like today's guests, and just have different conversations from different angles on relationships. And so today we're going to actually be talking about marriage. And then the next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about parenting. And so I always want to come at the relationships from every angle. And so that's why we started this live cast. I really encourage you to share with your friends, let them know about it. They can watch live on YouTube or on the Relationship Matters Facebook page. And we broadcast live to there. And then it will go on a podcast in about a few days or so. It goes on to all the podcast platforms. And boy, have we ever had some fantastic guests and great nuggets. Now, last week we had Dr. Don Cure on, and if you were watching or you tried to watch later, you'll notice that we had all kinds of tech problems. So I want to, first of all, apologize for that. Not much I can do about it, but it crashed in the middle of it. And then secondly, I also want to just say Dr. Dawn has been so gracious, and she's going to come back on in May. And so we're going to have her back to finish that conversation about relationships within organizations and how they impact culture and whatnot. And so thank you for being patient last week. Thanks for those that were watching live and stuck with us to the very end, which was only about halfway through. And so there you go. So this week we're going to talk all things marriage, and I want to introduce to you Brian and Jen Harvey, and they are a married couple who actually help married couples, and it's awesome. And boy, do they ever carry the spectrum. You're going to hear their bio here. Brian pastoring, caring for people, marrying people, and then Jen, a lawyer who saw divorce firsthand and what the damage that could be to a family. And so they came together and decided to do something about it. And I just love that. And so Brian Harvey's an enthusiastic communicator who uniquely leads people in life-changing encounters with God. Brian clearly delivers messages that to people to apply Christ's truth to their lives. I've always said it's got to be relative. If it's just an idea, fantasy out there somewhere, if God's personal and he's relative, you're going to be okay. So for over 20 years, Brian's, spoken at worship service retreats, conferences. He's also appeared before audiences sizes, up to 3,000 people. He has a bachelor's degree from Moody. He has a master's degree from Trinity. So when I say expert, he's got a lot of training, but he's also written and developed and taught curriculum in congregations, and he's also served as a Michigan Air National Guard. So thank you for your service. Presenting holds the rank of Senior Master Sergeant, serving in Michigan's Joint Force Headquarters. That's where Operation Thriving Marriage comes from. He's got that military background, and so I love that. Now, Jennifer began teaching singles and married ministries with Brian in the early 2000s, but she's also a practicing lawyer and has a law practice, and started her own practice in 2003. And that's amazing. Kind of had several focuses: estate planning, all different, looks like you've done lots of different business and trust administration, and you also practice and include business law, real estate law, and condominium law. I live in a condo, and boy, could it needs you. Jennifer is frequent seminar conference speaker, Michigan Supreme Court Administration Office approved mediator. That's there's a job. Wow, mediation. I've done a bit of mediating in my ministry over the years. It's a very unique gifting, so that's awesome. She also has a nonprofit dedicated to eliminating modern day slavery or human trafficking, and now volunteers on their subcommittee advisory board for Vista Mera. Jennifer earned a bachelor's degree of arts in English from the University of Michigan, her Juris Doctor from Ave Marie Law School, and is certified marriage mediator through XO Marriage Mediation Institute. So that's a mouthful, you guys. That was a nice bio, but it is all says to me that you guys are super committed to marriages.
Oh, very, very much so, Mark. And thank you so much for having us. And shout out to all of your listeners for having us as well. We're delighted to be here. And we really have that big heart for marriages because we don't want people just to remain married and stay there. We want people to have that happy and healthy and thriving marriage that God has for us.
Right. Yeah, I know that, Sandy and I have been married 39 years, and there's been seasons where it's just kind of coasting, whatever. We've had seasons where it was like in our early years where I had addiction and it was just like explosive and emotional. And then we've had those seasons where it's just kind of you take each other for advantage and float. And then we've had the thriving seasons, and we're seeing now that thriving can actually be all the time. It doesn't have to just be a season.
Well, I think that's the big thing. Unfortunately, in those different seasons of marriage, early marriage, getting your career started, oftentimes people get married and then their career is just beginning. They're starting those families. This is the typical or the most common, I suppose, but obviously people getting married later in life, they have those different things. But every marriage goes through seasons, right? And then the trick is to have that thriving marriage is to be focusing on our marriage and focusing on those skills and focusing on that relationship in a way that is strengthening all the time, and realizing that as seasons change in our lives, seasons in our marriage change too, and we have to be prepared for that. And every one of those seasons can be preparing us for the next one if we're focusing on it, not just letting it coast, like you were saying. I love that language there.
Yeah, I think I always say you want to live on purpose, not by accident. And I think sometimes in our marriages or in our relationships, we tend to live by accident instead of on purpose. And so I think it's really, I love the title of your book. I've been reading it. I just love that concept that, anything, you got to invest in if you want a return on investment. You can't not make an investment and expect a return, right? And so marriage is active. It's a living organism in a sense, right? And so you need to keep working at it. And so, by the way, we want this to be interactive. So if you're watching, and we get varying amounts of people watching live or later, but even later, if you have questions, you can pop them in the comments. But I really want to encourage you, if you have anybody that who is struggling right now in their marriage, share this video, share out right away, invite them to come in with us here. Ask questions. If it'll pop into our studio. So if you ask questions while you were live, I'll answer those questions live. We'll answer them right here. I'll make sure that Brian and Jen know that what the questions are and whatnot. And then if it's later and you're watching, feel free to ask a question anyway, because I monitor the comments and then I can answer those questions for you as well if we need to. And so I just wanted to say that. So let's make this interactive. So make comments, or if you have thoughts as well, make comments in the comments or ask questions, and we can keep going.
And also with the interactive, if you guys want to, if you're listening to this later after the live one, at our website, we've got a button on it where you can actually leave us a voice message. So any questions there, those go straight to us, and we'll make sure to share those as well.
That is a great idea. I'm just going to put right now, there's your website. So if I'll put it in the comments later as well for you, but If you want to write that down, operationthrivingmarriage.com, and you can use that feature. So thanks. Say that again, Brian. Just did you go there and there's a button they can click and ask a question?
Yeah, it just says leave a voice message. It's right there on the bottom or the side, depending on if it's a mobile device or a computer. And you just click that and leave a voice message, and it'll go straight to us, and we can respond to that. There's also the normal contact stuff, but the voice message.
I love that feature. I got to look into that. That's a great idea. Okay, so let's jump into Operation Thriving Marriage. Obviously, I can hear the military language in there, but it really just speaks of training, right? Like it speaks that we're always training. The military, you don't, arrive all of a sudden and then never train again. Military, that whole concept. So let's talk about this a little bit. What does a thriving marriage look like?
Well, I think first step is understanding what marriage is intended to be. And obviously, I know some of the people who are watching us right now who are going to listen later, they don't necessarily share the same faith background that we do. But a big thing about understanding what marriage is it's two people becoming one couple. From a Christian perspective, there's a spiritual aspect to that. But even from a non-spiritual perspective, it's two people learning to live together as one couple. And it's not just about, oh, this person's going to make me happy, because happiness is fleeting. I'm very happy to be married, but it's one of those happiness ebbs and flows depending on what's going on, depending on what you had for breakfast that day. If you have heartburn all day because you had the spicy chorizo omelet, then you're not going to be happy. But it has nothing to do with who you're married to. It has to do with the spice and the sausage. And so a thriving marriage is focusing not on, oh, this person is going to make me happy, because that's not fair. That's too much of a burden to put on Jen, for her to put on me, say, you've got to make me happy, because you just can't consistently do that. But rather learning how to develop into the person that you should be. In a marriage is intended to help you develop into being the right kind of person, the person that's going to have a positive impact. We really believe that strong marriages build strong families that build strong communities. And really, we look at this throughout the world, and we're looking for having a strong, we look at what's going on in Ukraine right now, and this is being shown and recorded. There's the conflict in Ukraine. We used to think that we had this strong global community, and we've learned since that we didn't have it as strong as we thought. Right. But we think that when we have strong relationships, strong marriages, strong relationships at work or otherwise, then we can have those strong communities that make a difference. And marriage that's the purpose of it. It's to build those strong relationships that can make a positive difference in the world.
Yeah, it's so good because, people often will say to me, when you get married, that a lot of times women particularly feel like they lose their identity. And I always say, well, actually, you're not losing your identity, you're joining your identity, and it'll enhance it. I think in the true thriving marriage sense, that we still have, if I can put it this way, we still have individually, God even still sees us individually, but he now sees us as one as well. And I think so now we get the best of parts of each of us makes up that new whole. And so I see it not as a sacrifice or I see it as a joy, as a benefit to my life. Sandy adds value I don't have, and she sees things the way I don't see them. And so I learn every day from her.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think that's just such a positive perspective to have about it, because I don't think that a woman or a man need to lose who they intrinsically are. Of course, I think that we all need some of our harder edges, kind of smoothed out. And I think that's a good place to have that happen in the safety and the context of a marriage. But I think it's about kind of growing into yourself more as an individual as you're growing into each other as a couple as well.
Right. And you talk in the book about this idea of like a contract and covenant, and that I speak quite highly about the covenant, because a contract, can be broken, and a covenant feels more permanent, but it also has a witness involved in it. The covenant always has to have a witness. Contracts don't always have to have witnesses, right? You're the lawyer, Jen. So, but
that's very true. Yeah. Of course, I want to slap witnesses and a notary on everything, right?
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
but yeah, I think that it is something where we should be taking marriage in a lot of ways more seriously. Where not just about we should be staying together, because we do believe that people should stay married, but we think that it's something where we should also be looking to invest in the other individual and have that fulfilling, positive relationship for ourselves that we're then able to reflect out into the world and make a positive difference in the world too.
And from the
Yeah.
Christian perspective, we talk about that contract and covenant, but really from a Christian perspective, we see this as a step even beyond covenant, because even a covenant can be broken. There's still possible. It's like every covenant has, when you read the covenant, it has the consequences for breaking it. But
Right.
really, marriage, when you see what God talks about marriage in Bible from a Christian perspective, it's two people becoming one in a very real sense.
Right.
It's now, we're not obviously becoming some sort of material one where we're some weird Siamese twin. That's not what it is. We're not conjoined, but rather from a spiritual perspective, there is a oneness that happens. And in the
We're
Christian,
entwined,
exactly.
not conjoined, but entwined.
Yeah, and Christian theology teaches that God is a Trinity, one God, yet eternally existing in three persons. And we really believe that marriage allows us to experience something of what the Trinity has experienced through eternity, because we're two individuals. We don't stop being individuals, but we're one couple. And every decision that we make, everything we say, everything we do affects the other. And we are bound together, not by some legal thing, not just like, oh, we've got a contract, we've got a marriage license.
Although that's there too.
Those are all there, but really I would be losing something of intrinsically who I am at this point if I lost Jen. In the same way for her, we've become something new that God has created when we became married.
Yeah, a new entity in a sense. And I think that, like, one thing I've heard from like couples that I coach, they'll say, well, I feel trapped, by the contract, by the covenant. I feel trapped. I can't, if I want to honor God in some way, I got to stay in this mess and stay in this trouble and stay, because by that time, usually there's so much conflict and maybe one's treating the other not correctly. I tend to, a lot of my clients are in crisis, right? So I do a lot of crisis intervention for families. And so the trauma and the crisis is so great. But then if I start talking about contracts and covenant, that's not going to go anywhere, because all that does is make them feel trapped. But I keep telling them, no, you actually have the freedom. You're not trapped. You have the freedom to create something that's beautiful. If you both can humble yourselves and you can both see that you actually, come together into that one entity, you will start fighting. It's kind of, we go from me to we, right? You start to fight for the we instead of the I. And I think that there's power in that. Sandy and I, yes, the covenant did help keep us together when we were almost tearing apart, but it wasn't the covenant that kept us together. It wasn't the covenant that actually brought us back together. We were separated for a season. It wasn't the covenant that brought us back together. It was actually the love of God manifesting in our hearts. He brought us back together because he is love, right? And so it was that love that brought us back together, but we had to learn how to relate to each other in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the Bible talks about, really in Ephesians, it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And a lot of people will jump to the next verse, which is the verb submit actually doesn't exist in the Greek in that next sentence. Yeah. But I'm sorry, geeking out on you there. But really, that submit one another, it's not because your spouse deserves your submission, not because your spouse has earned, and nor is it because one has some authority or some positional power over, but rather because Jesus is king, because Jesus is in charge, we submit to one another. And that's the framework that oftentimes we've got to help couples see through, because a lot of the conflict is because, well, I want to be in charge. No, I want to be in charge. And it's this back and forth rather than accepting that, no, it's mutual submission, because there's the marriage, there's something there that's bigger and greater, that's going to have a positive impact in the world when we do that.
Yeah, I agree. Submission, we view submission through the wrong lens of how we see authority. And I think that sometimes when we look at it through the wrong lens, that means one's dominant and one's submissive. And that's not what that is talking about. It's actually talking about honoring one another. Or even better, in your book, you cover that in one of your chapters about serving one another. That
Absolutely.
true submission is when I want to serve my wife. So it's not about me lording it over. I'm the head of this home. That we have a misunderstanding of covering. Covering is not lording it over. Covering is coming under and scooping up and lifting up the other person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful thing when that's done the right way. And of course, people are different, just as far as personalities and giftings and skills and quirks and things like that. So I think we all bring in different kind of baggage, some good, some bad, from families of origin and past relationships and experiences, just as to maybe who should be doing what kind of a thing. But I just feel like if you've got somebody who's experienced, say, mom taking care of the bills, but you've got in this new marriage a husband who's a CPA, husband might say, hey, I got this, I can take care of it, even though your mom took care of it. So there's no problems there. It's just that who has the skills and the talent and the understanding and the availability to do it, and of course being open to things shifting just as time goes on, as there are changes in life and in the marriage. Something that we experienced recently was Brian deployed to the Middle East in July of 2020 at the height of the pandemic, and came back in January 2021. So there were a lot of things that I was stepping into. And if there's any military spouses listening, when you've got a military member deployed, like, everything in the house breaks, and that's just life. So navigated through a lot of those things. But I think sometimes when you've got a spouse who has to be gone for military deployment or business or whatever the case may be, the one who's there can have more of that assurance and feel good about, oh, I did that. Hey, I might have more capability than I thought I had, and I can really be stretched in these ways. So I think that good things can come out of even those times of separation, even if you don't want to be away from your spouse like that.
And I think it's important too in those times to not allow the newly realized competency to be a threat. Because some people walk into, and this is one of the things that when I'm talking with airmen coming back from deployments, and we encourage this for people that work for any sort of marketplace job where they have to travel, sometimes your spouse will start doing your job at home. And coming back, they'll feel like, well, I don't have the significance or importance that I once did. But that's not true. Now your spouse has gained competency in an area. So now you guys are both stronger and healthier. And so when one of you has to be gone again, it's not a loss. It's now we can work through this. And everything you do in a marriage, it benefits both. So while I was away serving and doing what we needed to do, I learned things, I developed, and I came back with new skills. I came back with new experiences that made us stronger as a family. And Jen gained new competency in areas that she hadn't had to stretch herself in before, that made us stronger as a family. And anytime we can develop that, and that's one of the things we really focus on in this idea, we call it team marriage, that anything in the marriage that we develop in together, it makes us stronger. And we can't allow ourselves to feel threatened by these new competencies or the idea that one has to be separated, because it all goes back together to forming a stronger, more effective team.
Yeah, and I think that you hit on a really important point. We've got to see it as a team. It's interesting to me how, I guess humanity, insecurities cause all kinds of troubles, right? So when we're insecure, we tend to see through a different lens. We see people, our spouses attacking us or saying we're not good enough, or we're, it's amazing how that can inform us about our partner when really we're on the same team. I really like what you said there at the mic drop, is that, when one benefits, we both benefit. And that's the key, right? It's like whatever I do and whatever I invest and contribute to the marriage is beneficial to me as well. It's like if I'm serving my wife, it's going to be benefit to me as well. And it's this mutual submission. Also, there's mutual benefit. And I think we need to that's part of a thriving marriage. What it would look like is that you're operating and functioning as a team.
And that's how we like to, even talk about things when it comes to arguments, because it's really, there's no winner or loser in the argument, because when you're married, it's one of those things you both win or you both lose together. So there's a lot of creative ways to try to work some different things out. But I think the theme that you've hit on so much, Mark, is just that humility and looking out for the other spouse. And if you're both looking out for each other, it's just a beautiful recipe for a fantastic marriage.
Right. So what help, maybe there's some people that are watching that or will watch that, maybe they're struggling right now in their marriage. What are some things are there a couple of takeaways for today that they could just say, I could do this today to see the change? I think, what I think often we think we can control the other person, or we think we have to change the other person. I can't tell you how many times people have said, well, I'm here, so you change her, or, we're here because I want you to change him. And that's not it. We've got to look at our own self and our own hearts and allow God to do the change in us. And I just wonder if is there any tips on, okay, so maybe they're in a stage where it is a bit taken for granted. There's some tension. Communications become a problem. What are some things they could do?
And we really think that communication is that major key to a thriving marriage. And we recently spoke at a seminar, marriage seminar, where we were given the topic of communication. And Brian had this really great quote there. And why don't you go ahead and share that one?
I saw this meme and I adapted a little bit, but really, when it comes to communication, you want to speak in a way that your spouse wants to listen to you, and you want to listen in a way your spouse wants to talk to you. And I think that's really important. I do want to offer a caveat to those who are listening to us right now, in that we've got some ideas and we're going to share these ideas with you, but want you to know that we can't counsel you, coach you, pastor you over a podcast or a live cast. Sure. What you're going through is real and it's important. And I don't want to minimize what you're facing right now because you have something going on. So we're going to share some of these things with you that we hope will help you, but don't think that we're just trying to put your situation in a box because there's something going on there. But I think that's one of the big things is think about your communication style. And when you talk, your tone, your words, your body language, how you're presenting yourself physically, is that making your spouse want to hear what you have to say, or is it distancing them? And then when you're listening, are you paying attention? Are you listening in a way to actually hear them and be changed by what they're saying? Or are you listening to try to solve their problem or fix? You're treating them as an object when you do that, but you want to treat them as fully human and hear their whole message. The other thing that I think is incredibly important is walk into the situation with the attitude that you're going to fix you. Not you're going to fix your spouse, not in fact the situation, but you're going to fix what you're bringing to the situation. Every conflict that we ever face ultimately comes down to an unmet expectation. Whatever argument you're facing now, when you look back, how did we get to here? There was an expectation. I expected X, Y, and Z to happen. I expected you to do A, B, C, and it didn't. And so get through that. Why did I expect that? And why wasn't my expectation met? Did your spouse know you expected it? Was that a voiced expectation? Or we talk about unexpectations in the book, and those are unmet, unvoiced, unshared, or unreasonable expectations. Unmet, unvoiced, unshared, and unreasonable. So look at your expectation. Did they know that that expectation existed? Is it something that you just had a difference of opinion on that, hey, I think that steak is the perfect Sunday dinner and you thought chicken was the perfect, and so there was an unshared expectation? Or was that just completely unreasonable? I expected that you would be up at 3:30 in the morning to go for a run with me every morning because, dang it, that's what we did in basic training.
Not happening in the Harvey household, by the way.
I was just going to say, I can see Jen's face like, no.
And Jen loves to work out, but not the way I work out.
Yeah.
But so those are things really that I would encourage you. If you're in a situation right now, look at it. What are you bringing to that situation? How are you communicating? And communicate in a way that your spouse wants to hear from you, but also listen so that they can tell you what's going on. and then really delve into why wasn't that expectation met, and then work through how that can be resolved, either changing the expectation because the expectation was unreasonable, or sharing, hey, these are the expectations, and then now they can be met because now they're understood and they're shared.
Right.
And I think, go ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think another thing to do too is we talk about catch the little foxes. That's some wisdom literature out of the book of Song of Solomon, and the idea is you're catching these little problems when they're little, and then you're moving forward so that you're handling those so that they don't get bigger, and as the proverb in that wisdom literature goes, ruins the vineyard. So I think the little problems can ruin the household. And anyone who's listening to this who's saying, hey, Jen, I've got a medium-sized fox or I got a big one, we'll be praying for you on that, but tackle that as soon as you possibly can, because it's only going to get bigger and it's going to be more difficult to deal with. And a lot of times I think strategies for approaching people is sometimes you can say, I've got a problem because you are the one who has the problem that I need some help from you with to try to solve this. We talk about using the butter voice, because if you're going to ask somebody to pass the butter, you're not going to be yelling at them and all agitated. It's just going to be like you're saying, nice conversation. Could you please pass the butter? Could you please help me with this? Or I think it's always okay to be vulnerable with your spouse and say, I've got some concerns here and I'm afraid I'm going to even wreck this conversation, but I really need your help and we need to work on this thing together. And what do we do? And what are some different steps? I think engaging your spouse and not saying, I'm going to present this as a monologue, but have this be a dialogue where, again, you're listening just as much, if not more, than what you're speaking and adding to the conversation.
Yeah, that's so good. So good, Jennifer. I totally agree with that. I think so. I always say perception's reality. It's not always actuality.
Oh, true.
There you go.
Yes.
And so we base a lot of our opinions, and the other thing I always say is assumption's the enemy of faith. So if you want to have faith in someone, don't assume things, ask.
Yes.
So that last little 10 minutes is worth somebody clipping out and sending to a friend, because that was solid advice. Those are takeaway principles. Yes, everybody's situation is different. We've all gone through different things in different ways, but whether you're in a crisis marriage or whether you're in a fantastic marriage, those principles will keep you thriving. Like that's that communication, that is so important, to listen, to understand. Don't, not just the information, but why. What's behind the information? What are they feeling? Because a lot of times, early in our marriage, I would kind of try. We generally fight on behavior level, but we never actually wonder what the feeling was behind the thoughts that led to the behavior. And so I would be arguing with Sandy or fighting with Sandy, and I would be kind of I would try and solve the problem at the behavior level. And all I did was I call it the anger ladder. We would just climb the anger ladder together.
Yes.
Because we're trying to solve, instead of understanding what her feeling was behind it. What was the feeling, the emotional feeling she had that drove her to think what she thought? And so we started learning language like, I could take responsibility for sending a relational message. So I'm sorry, honey, that I sent a relational message. That was not my heart. So we wanted to always know, okay, because what I would do is I would discount her perception, because to her it was very real. So if I just discounted it, she felt devalued. But when I actually valued her perception and her feelings, but then discussed them, then I had the opportunity to actually tell her what the actuality was. So then I could say, hey, that wasn't my heart. I'm sorry that I communicated that relational message to you. What I was trying to say is this. And now all of a sudden I realized we started having dialogue, and it changed our marriage.
And that's something. So if you're listening, I'm going to pull a Mark here. That's gold right there. If you're listening to this right now, what Mark said, because notice what he said. He didn't say, I'm sorry you feel that way. He said, yes. I'm sorry I communicated that. He took ownership for that. And that's huge, because it's easy. Yes. Well, you felt that way, but that's dismissive of the person. And
exactly.
Every form of communication, there's three messages. There's the message you intend to send, the message you actually send, and the message that was received. And the goal is to get all those as close together as possible. But if I've sent the wrong message, it's not the person's fault that they received the wrong message.
Yeah.
It's like, that's huge what Mark just said right there.
Yeah, in my book, I have, you know, the 5 pillars of a healthy foundation. Communication's one of them, and that's what I, you want to be able to communicate those 3, have a close enough alignment with those 3 things, because just because I say it doesn't mean that, you know. But what I discovered in my research was that if you drew a graph and you said, you know, communication is words, tone of voice, and body language, what percentage would that be? And I was surprised to find out only 7% is the words we speak, 38% is the tone of voice, and 55% is the body language in communication.
And something I would add to that on the message received is a part of that is the baggage the receiver's carrying.
Yeah, filters.
You may have said a word or said something that reminded them of someone they dated in high school, or a boss that treated them badly. Their first job, when they got their first job, summer job in high school, and their boss said that exact word that you just said, and it created all of this. The message received became cluttered, became fuzzy, because what they brought into that message. So it's important to be aware of and open yourself up to listening to what your spouse is experiencing. And it's important too, when something like that happens, hey, that reminded me of Bill, who yelled at me when I burnt the hamburger. You know, be honest and open. It's like, hey, these are the things that are going on in me, because when you share your heart with your spouse, then that's going to help them take care of that heart for you.
Right. I always tell people, you got to teach them how to love you.
Yeah.
You got to teach others how to love you. What are, you know, yeah, just, that's so good. You know, and I think the other thing is, how often do we have an argument or a fight, and then we kind of just let time take care of it, and we never really come back and revisit or talk about it, communicate through, what was I feeling? Why did that trigger me? Like, if we do a self, you know, search, and we know that, here's a good tip: take it back to your spouse and tell them what you discovered. Because one of the in the book, the other pillar is trust, and one of the things that builds trust is transparency. So when I go back to Sandy and say, you know, I don't know why I was off the other day, and I do apologize for what I said, but I've done some thinking and praying about it, and I've realized this is what triggered me. Oh, she's like, I can totally see how that would be. I'm going to be more careful how I say it next time, just so that you don't get triggered. Now all of a sudden we're a team again. I made my discovery known, and now she knows how to love me and how to help me. And
you're both owning it, and I think that's really beautiful too, because you're saying, gosh, this particular thing triggered me or upset me. You probably had no idea about this, but now that she's aware of it, it's not a relationship where anybody's walking on eggshells, but she's just saying, goodness, I'll put things in a different way, because I don't want to upset you. I don't want to hurt you, because we're a team.
Yeah.
And I think
think of the difference if you demanded it.
Right.
It's not going to go well.
True.
And see, that's an example we were talking about, catch the little foxes, because a lot of times people think, if we just let time heal this, we'll just starve the fox, they'll die. Those foxes, they're sneaky. They just start eating the roots of the vegetation around them. You know, so that time is actually just giving that fox an opportunity to eat and get fat. It's not starving the fox at all, because there's plenty of food, because that time, if you don't deal with those thoughts that are there, they fester and they build up, and you've got 2 people feeding that fox all of these negative energy, and now you've got this giant fox ready to rip through your marriage.
It's so true. That's, you know, keep short accounts. There's another. If you want a thriving marriage, keep short accounts, right? Like, don't carry resentment. Don't carry, you know, bad feelings. Deal with it. Work on it. Like that. That's a great way. And it doesn't always feel good in the moment, but boy, you take care of those foxes, because those foxes can turn into grizzly bears. And I love the story in First Nations, First Peoples groups about the grandson talking to the grandfather, and he says, we have 2 wolves in each of us. One's, you know, angry and frustrated and selfish, and The other one's full of joy and love and peace. And the grandson thinks for a minute and says, "Which one wins, Grandpa?" And he says, "The one you feed."
Yes.
So if you're,
True.
if you're going to feed the foxes, then they're going to get bigger. And feeding them is not dealing with them too. Either way, the way you starve a fox is to take the food away. I love that analogy, you guys. That's a fantastic analogy.
And sometimes you just really have to have that courage, because I think sometimes it's hard, and we as a people, we don't want to have conflict, or we don't
Yeah.
want to feel like we're instigating something. But sometimes you just have to have that courage and that humility to say, I'm going to lay aside some insecurity that I have. I'm going to lay aside some of my own comfort to go to my spouse and say, we really need to have this conversation, and I need your help with this. And that really will help amplify positive things in a marriage. It more often than not, that's not going to cause problems.
Right. Yeah, that's good. That's good. I think it's so important that we, don't let things fester. We just got to deal with it. And the thing is as much courage as it may take right now to say something, it's going to take exponentially more later when that the bigger the fox gets, the harder it is, and the more courage it takes. And by the way, the more defensive the other person will be. Because if you let it fester, it can cause a lot of destruction. And that, if there's number one thing out of all the clients, over the years that I've and people that I've pastored over the years, that's the one thing that I've noticed the most, is that people just don't deal with it in a timely fashion, and it becomes something greater. The other thing I've noticed is that they exaggerate the problem the longer they take to deal with the problem.
Yes.
It grows. The fox grows. So the problem gets bigger and bigger in their mind. And pretty soon, it's not that they're dishonest, but their perception has taken them into places that just have not even close to actuality. And the longer you leave it, the more that grows.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's huge. And so one of the things we talk about in the book as well is, in this operation, Thriving Marriage, the most effective tactic in the operation, the most important tactic, is forgiveness. We're going to have to forgive.
Yeah.
Right? Because two imperfect people living life together, it's going to happen. And that's the foundation of our Christian faith, is the forgiveness that God has given us. And in that, when you have that forgiveness and you've experienced that, you have the ability to forgive, and you're going to need to forgive. And Jen can tell you that in marriage, she has to forgive a lot. She's married to me. So there's a lot of forgiveness in Jen. But seriously, forgive. That's your secret weapon to having a thriving marriage, because no marriage is going to be conflict-free. Matter of fact, if it is conflict-free, then there's something you're not communicating about. It's just that's not a way. But you have to be able to forgive. And unlike sometimes where you can forgive someone, but then that relationship still has ended, or that relationship that has gone the way relationships do in life, marriage doesn't have that. You've got to forgive, and then you've got to restore. And that's what Jesus did on the cross. It wasn't just forgiving people for sin, but it was restoring humanity to God and starting the new creation that God is going to ultimately realize. We have to be a part of that new creation by creating new life in our marriage through forgiveness and restoration as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important, forgiveness. I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what forgiveness is. I use the example of a big fish hook. They think it's letting the other person off the hook. What they don't realize is they're on the hook on the inside of that person. So if if you're actually letting yourself off the hook by forgiving. And the other thing is as long as you're in unforgiveness, you're allowing them to continue to control you. And so if you want your power back, if you want your life back, then you need to forgive so that you can then move forward and choose. And of course, in our world, in the faith community, that choice is to surrender to the Lord and to give him the burden. But you have free will God will not violate the law of free will. So it's love has to have free will within it. So yeah, I think forgiveness. So we've got, serving one another. We've got like proper communication, healthy communication. We've got forgiveness is another real tip there and clue, and keeping short accounts. That forgiveness should come quick. The longer it takes to forgive, the more bitterness you're going to have to let go of.
Absolutely.
And that's no fun.
That's no fun at all.
Because the way we kind of put it in the book was, we talked about sometimes people, it's like they're going to like marinate in that kind of anger or unforgiveness. And the reason I wanted to use that word is if you're marinating meat like a chicken, I mean, it's the chemical change. And we just feel like the only real way to be able to get out of something like that is to have God intervene in it. And it just makes it a lot harder. So don't marinate.
Yeah. Don't marinate. If you're going to marinate in love, not in.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah, it's so important. These are such great practical tips for people to take away from. Now, I just feel it's time to maybe just put a caveat in here. If you're being abused, if there's violence against you, you've been harmed in some way, this conversation is not about that. This conversation is about normal marriage and wanting to make it a thriving marriage. If you're at risk, please reach out to somebody, reach out to a local pastor, reach out to a friend, somebody that you trust, and tell them what's going on. Don't keep it a secret. Secrets is where lives go to die. Every hidden thing erodes trust. And so to trust yourself, it's time to let go of that secret and just move forward. So I just want to put that caveat out there. You should not be mistreated, abused in any way. I have helped couples and families come back from that. It is possible. There's hope. There's always hope when God's involved. There's always hope when you have good counsel. But get yourself out of risk first, and then you can talk about that. But I just want to put that caveat out there, because people listening to us might think, that they should just take that. They're scared. If they brought this up, like what we just said, if they practice the principles we just taught, it could get them in trouble. Because if you're with somebody that just doesn't believe the same and doesn't act the same, that makes it difficult, right?
And Mark, that's a big thing from us as well. As we'd say, if there's issues with addiction, if there's issues just as to adultery or abuse, you need to be able to recognize what some of those things are, and have a safe person that you're able to talk to and work some of those things through. But we of course want everyone to be safe.
Yeah, and I think that's important, put in there. But if we want to keep from ever getting to that place, these principles will help do that, and in life, and so I just felt like I needed to say that, because I could see people, listening in and saying, well, if I tried to say something even nicely, I would get, stomped on or whatever. I don't want anybody to feel like that. First get to safety and then get help. And I always say you can't help somebody that doesn't want help. You can't make somebody change.
Truth.
And so you have to get yourself safe first, anyway, I'll leave it there. Hey, if you have any questions, I know there's been people jumping on and off, and sometimes it shows me and sometimes it doesn't. Make sure you put them in, or a comment. I'd love to hear from you. I want to know that you're listening in. I want you to join this conversation. And so please make sure you do that, so we know you're there, even because I don't know. It doesn't always show me YouTube comments or count the people on YouTube. So anyway, either way, whatever you're watching on, make sure you jump into the conversation here. So now we've kind of got some really good things out there in principle and stuff. What else do you think? What would be good for what's been something in your marriage that's really helped you guys thrive?
I'd say for us, it's about communication. Some people will say, okay, you've got somebody who's a pastor and somebody who's a lawyer. You guys are professional communicators, right? Well, no, we screw this up sometimes as well. But I think a lot of times, just in the busyness of life between, work and kids and being involved in the community, you have to make sure to really slow down and make sure that you're actually listening and you're actually taking that time to communicate too.
Right.
And there's nothing off the table. So this is live, so I'm gonna be careful about where I go
Oh,
here.
we're in trouble, Mark.
But talking about intimacy is important too.
You
know,
betcha.
It's that's an important part of what marriage is, and we've actually on our podcast, Operation Thriving Marriage, we talk about that topic in one of our episodes. That's huge for having a thriving marriage, because a lot of people think that it's the most natural thing in the world and everything's going to be rosy. And while it is very natural, researchers estimate about 75% of couples are going to have some sort of dysfunction at some time in their marriage with that, and they're going to need to work through that. And the trick to dealing with that is communicating about that as well. You need to there is no topic off the table. In the Bible, when the first marriage happened and the first man and woman were there married together, the Bible describes them as naked and unashamed. And that wasn't just they didn't have clothes on. It was they were not ashamed of anything about their experience, about their lives. And they were completely open to each other. And that's an important aspect of marriage. And that's something that oftentimes is tricky, because when you get married, you still have a life from before you were married. And there's a lot of life that happened before you got married. And sometimes things will pop up. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was affecting me until just now. And that happened 50 years ago, 60 years ago, perhaps. And so constantly
marriage is the great magnifier, right?
Sure.
Magnifies anything you might have had a struggle with. It's gonna I always say emotional intimacy will always lead to better physical intimacy. And so that communication piece you're talking about is so vital to that, for sure.
And I want to say too, you talked about it being marriage being the great magnifier. Any little thing is made huge. But the great thing about marriage, when you practice these principles, is those things, those problems that come up, you've got someone there that's going to walk with you through the problem. It's not, you've got this huge problem, now go fix yourself. I mean, there have been times in the military where I have to tell someone to go fix themselves. But in marriage, it's never go fix yourself. It's, hey, we're in this together. We're walking through this together.
Let's heal together. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and in that sense too, Mark, I think marriage can also be the great diffuser, right? Because it can just diffuse some, horrible bombs that you might have brought into the marriage, and hopefully you can deal with a lot of those before you would get married. And sometimes, of course, you need a counselor for an individual person in the marriage. Sometimes you need some couples counseling, but it's very important to just see the positives that marriage can do to that as well.
Yeah, so true. So true. And to have, it's such a joy. Like Sandy and I enjoy great companionship. It's not just we can sit in the room quiet and just enjoy each other's presence, and not say anything, right? But and on the other hand, we can talk for hours about nothing. So that's one of the beautiful things. And I know that that's hard for people that are single, maybe, that are watching, but that is something to look forward to in marriage, that you can have that companionship, and it's so important. So I'd like to just talk for a few minutes about this idea of legacy. You say something, and you said it today, I think, and you say something in the book that marriage isn't just for us. Marriage is for a reflection for the community at large. It's for others as well. And I think that a lot of people don't see it that way. Sandy and I do. We live on mission. We live with a vision, and we have a family vision and a family mission. And I address that in my book, how important it is to have vision and mission statements that are kind of like riverbanks that keep you flowing in the same direction. And I always tell people, you leave a legacy whether you know you are or not. And I'd rather not leave it to accident or hope that it was a good one, because it could be as bad as it is good. And so maybe you guys could address that a little bit, because you do address it in the book, that this idea of marriage wasn't just for us, it's for others.
Oh, that's very much the case, and we just feel like, again, from that faith basis, God is the Trinity, the three unique persons in one. And with marriage is one couple, but it's two unique people, and then coming together, we feel like we can reflect that small aspect of God in that way, and we can really be representative of God, so that for the very positive work in society and in the community that we're able to do. So I think marriage is just a really wonderful reflection of God, but also we talk about Christianity being really a counterculture for the good, and we want to make sure that we're working within the community that we have, but it is that countercultural movement for positive things.
And as Christians, it's important that Jesus is in charge, and we're part of this new creation that Jesus is doing. And so we believe that marriage reflects that, and we show the people around us who God is and what God's love is through how we interact and how we love each other.
Right.
Jesus in the Gospel of John, talking to his disciples, and this was to all Christians, not just marriage, but he said, "They'll know you're my disciples by your love for one another." That was for all disciples, but that's especially for Christian couples and how we love. But for those of you who aren't ready to take that step yet, you're not sure about Jesus, you're not sure about this thing, I encourage you, keep researching, contact us, contact Mark. We'd love to share that with you and be part of your journey. But even if you're not there yet, you have a vision of what you want the world to be. And your marriage is an instrument to bring that about.
That's right.
And if you want a world, what's the type of world you want if you have children or grandchildren or plan on having that experience? Again, talking to married couples, the world that you want this world to be the change you want to see is the cliche, right?
Yeah.
But in marriage, you have the ability to enact that. Christians in our marriage, we bring about God's reign through how we live out our marriage and how we live out our faith in front of our children, in front of our neighbors, and with our church and in front of our community, our larger community. Whatever you want the world to look like, your marriage is going to help make the world be that. And we encourage you to think through that and develop that plan and develop that relationship between the two of you to build that.
Yeah. So good. I also have found, like, because of that, and because we're intentional with it, it actually helps Sandy and I be accountable in our marriage, because I want to be authentic. I don't want to be one thing and say another. And so for us, it was like challenging. Like, so when we were having struggle in the marriage, it's like, whoa, hang on now, we got to deal with this, because we are reflecting the love of God. We're reflecting our love to our kids and to their family and their friends and whatnot. And so it really helped us being on mission together in keeping those short accounts. All the principles we're talking about today were easy to follow and to do, because we wanted to be that positive reflection of love. This is what love looks like. This is what, real love is. Unconditional love looks like. We're not perfect. We struggle, but we're open about it. We're transparent about it. We just live authentically. And I think that hits, like, I like that in your book, because that is so important for people to realize that you don't have to be, you're not in competition. I don't know why marriage, like so many people in marriage, are competitive with each other. You're a team, and you have the great privilege and honor of living out a life serving others and being on mission together. It gives our marriage purpose, and so that really helps, I think. Well, listen, it's 2 minutes to go. I want to make sure we promote you. Anybody watching this or watching later, I'll put this in the comments as well. I think I missed an R in marriage. How do you like that? Hang on for a second.
Thanks, Mark. You got us. We appreciate
it. What am I doing? How's that?
There we go.
So make sure you go, and if you want, just Google Operation Thriving Marriage. You'll see they have a podcast, and hopefully I'll be on there one day when they start opening it up to guests. But they do a podcast. They have their book out. You can order their book, Operation Thriving Marriage, and I highly recommend it. And then also you can reach out to them, and like you said, on their website, even if you have questions for them, you can ask them questions. They'll get back to you. I really encourage you. I know we've on the show at different guests, we sometimes talk about faith and God more than other times, but I really want you to know that this isn't a religious thing. This isn't a church thing. We're talking about a relationship thing. We're talking about that relationship with God is reflected in your relationship in your marriage. It's going to bring health. It's going to bring it to a thriving state. And there's so much joy in that, and there's so much life in it. And so I really encourage you. You may not believe the same way as we do, but here's a challenge for you. This is what I know. It's not my job or the Harvey's job to convince you. It's not our job. If God is God and he's that powerful, why don't you ask him? Just ask him to reveal himself to you. Maybe you're in a frustrated state right now. Maybe your marriage is in a crisis. Have you ever stopped and just said, God, I need to hear from you. Would you reveal yourself to me? And I really believe that if you do that, he will respond. If you seek him, you'll find him. And so I just really want to encourage you with that. We're not here to preach at anybody. We're not here to expound, but the principles that we live by are founded in that place. So I have to be authentic to who I am as well. So I just want you to know that's where that comes from. But the principles still stand if you apply these things you learned today. So if you know somebody, like I said, that's struggling, send them to operationthrivingmarriage.com or share this video. Share this video. You can share it off of YouTube or off of Facebook. Either way, you can share it with somebody that you know. Send it to them, private message it to them, and maybe something they can pull or extrapolate from this conversation is going to change their lives. So Brian and Jen, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for joining us today. We'll have this out on podcast format too later, and I'll send you the links for both, and then you can share it out to your family and friends too. But thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Thank you so much. This was great. And
Yeah.
thank you to all of you who listened or are listening and will listen. We appreciate you. We love you and look forward to hearing your stories of having a thriving marriage.
Yeah, thank you. All right. I want to wrap up with a big announcement. Now, Brian and Jen, you can listen in if you stay on, and because when I go off air, you and I can just say goodbye to each other. But I want to just tell you all, my book, Relationship Matters, and the first section of it is the 5 pillars of a healthy relationship, and a healthy foundation in every relationship. And I've been wanting for a while, how do I make this more available? How can I put it in a format that could really help? And I've done it. It's going to be if you go to Relationship Matters by Mark Gordon Thinkific.com, and I'm going to put this in the comments so you can just click the link. I now have I'm starting this platform for education, for training, so it's a live masterclass. Well, not live, a videotaped masterclass with notes and relationship challenges in them. And you can now get it. And because, just for appreciation for you watching the show, if you use the code on the checkout for appreciation, you'll get 50% off, and it'll be 50% off for you. And so I really encourage you to go check that out and to watch it, and then watch further. I'm aiming to have 6 courses up over the next year. So I really want to just take the information that I've written about and be able to share it and express it in this way. And this all comes out of the live workshops that I do here and there and everywhere. And people kept telling me, you should write a book, you should put it in video form. So now I've written a book and it's in video form. So no excuses. You can go to my website too. If you're not sure how to get there, just go to markgordon.ca and you go on what I offer, and you're going to see courses. Just click on there and you'll find it as well. So there you go. That's the big announcement for today. We have finally launched that. I keep telling people it was coming and they stopped believing me because it took so long to get launched, but there it is. It's launched now. So I hope you can enjoy that. Thanks again, Brian and Jen. It was great to have you on the show, and I'm going to sign off. Thanks, everybody. Make sure you leave your comments and all that. We'll answer you later. Talk to you later.